9 shockingly good things came from Pearl Harbor, and number 1 may change how you see that day forever. Number 9. The end of Asian citizenship bans. Before 1941, American law straight up banned immigrants from China, India, and the Philippines from ever becoming naturalized citizens. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and the United States suddenly needed China as a military ally against Japan. Having laws on the books that said your wartime allies were racially unfit to be citizens was pretty awkward. So, in an entirely unintended diplomatic scramble, Congress passed the Magnuson Act of 1943. It repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act and granted citizenship rights. The catch? Congress set the annual immigration quota from China to exactly 105 people. That is not a typo. They created a historic civil rights breakthrough that could literally fit inside a single movie theater. Number 8. The National School Lunch Program. When the military started drafting millions of young men after Pearl Harbor, the Army doctors made a horrifying discovery. Hundreds of thousands of recruits were so malnourished from the Great Depression that they physically failed their basic physicals. The Pentagon realized childhood hunger was not just tragic, it was a national security disaster. So, as a direct consequence of those draft medical exams, Congress passed the National School Lunch Act in 1946. The law permanently funded free and reduced-price cafeteria meals. They literally classified chicken nuggets and mashed potatoes as strategic military defense assets. Number 7. Cheap, mass-produced penicillin. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928, but scientists could only grow it in tiny, pathetic laboratory flasks. In 1941, the world supply of penicillin was so small, it could barely treat 10 people. Then Pearl Harbor dragged America into a global war where battlefield infections were guaranteed to kill thousands. The government declared antibiotics a strategic priority and handed blank checks to pharmaceutical companies. Engineers figured out deep tank fermentation using giant vats of corn syrup. By 1945, American factories were churning out 650 billion units every month. The price collapsed from $20 a dose down to 55 cents. An attack meant to destroy the Pacific Fleet accidentally made curing a deadly bacterial infection cheaper than a diner coffee. Okay, so far a Sunday morning bombing run fixed school lunches and flooded the world with cheap medicine. Number 6. Permanent officer commissions for women nurses. Before Pearl Harbor, the military viewed women nurses as temporary helpers. They received relative rank, which meant zero real command authority, and tiny pensions. When the bombs fell on Hawaii, military hospitals were instantly overwhelmed with casualties. Over 59,000 nurses mobilized and kept the entire military healthcare system from collapsing under fire. They ran surgical wards in mud tents and treated amputations under artillery barrages. By 1947, Congress had to admit that calling these women temporary sidekicks was embarrassing. They passed the Army-Navy Nurses Act, finally granting women permanent officer status and full military benefits. Number 5. The creation of the CDC. To train millions of new recruits after Pearl Harbor, the Army built massive training camps all across the American South. There was just one tiny problem. The southern swamps were infested with malaria-carrying mosquitoes that started taking out soldiers before they even shipped out. The government set up an emergency civilian agency called Malaria Control in War Areas. Their job was simple: dig drainage ditches, spray pesticides, and hunt bugs around military bases. Once the war ended, nobody wanted to fire the country's best bug hunters. In 1946, that humble swamp draining squad was reorganized into the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The global health agency watching out for pandemics today exists because the Army needed to keep mosquitoes off recruits in Georgia. Number 4. Universal federal maternity care. When millions of junior enlisted men got drafted, Uncle Sam paid them about $50 a month. That was fine for boots and beans, but completely useless for hospital bills when their wives got pregnant. Wives of young sailors were showing up at clinics with zero cash to pay for childbirth. So in 1943, Congress quietly funded the Emergency Maternity and Infant Care Program. If you were a low-ranking serviceman, the government covered 100% of your wife's prenatal checkups, delivery, and baby care. No deductibles, no insurance copays. It paid for 1.2 million births during the war. It was the largest free maternity program in American history, and it only happened because drafting millions of broke husbands made childbirth an emergency. Now, we are entering the top 3, where Pearl Harbor completely rewired modern global power. Number 3. The birth of the modern intelligence community. On the morning of December 7th, 2 Army privates staring at a brand new radar screen at Opana Point spotted the entire Japanese air fleet flying toward Oahu. They called it in, and their superior officer told them not to worry about it because a flight of friendly B-17 bombers was scheduled for breakfast. The Navy had code intercepts, the Army had radar data, and the State Department had diplomatic cables, but none of them talked to each other. After the attack, the Roberts Commission investigated how a massive strike force sneaked past the most powerful nation on Earth. Their conclusion was brutal. The data was there, but the agencies were hoarding it like kids with lunch snacks. To make sure nobody ever ignored a radar screen again, Congress passed the National Security Act of 1947. It created the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, and the CIA. The entire modern intelligence network was built to fix the most expensive miscommunication in military history. Number 2, the Double V campaign and military desegregation. When the draft began, more than 1 million Black Americans put on the uniform to fight Axis tyranny. Yet, they were forced into strictly segregated units and treated as second-class citizens at home. Black newspapers launched the Double V campaign, Victory Against Fascism Abroad, and Victory Against Racism at Home. Pilots like the Tuskegee Airmen posted combat records that shattered racist military myths. When these veterans returned, they refused to accept Jim Crow anymore. The political pressure became impossible to ignore. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the entire United States military. It was the first major federal desegregation order in modern American history, and it became the battering ram for the wider civil rights movement. Number 1, the GI Bill and the invention of the middle class. In 1944, American politicians were sweating bullets. 16 million soldiers were going to come home looking for jobs that did not exist. The last time a world war ended, jobless veterans marched on Washington in the 1932 Bonus Army riots. Congress realized that having 16 million unemployed young men with combat training sitting on street corners was a terrible idea. So, to keep the job market from collapsing, they passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. We know it as the GI Bill. It paid full college tuition, provided monthly living stipends, and guaranteed zero down payment home loans. Before Pearl Harbor, higher education was a luxury playground reserved for the wealthiest 5% of the country. By 1947, veterans on the GI Bill made up nearly half of all college students in America. Over 7.8 million veterans went to university or trade school, becoming engineers, doctors, and accountants. They bought suburban homes by the millions, turning what was once a luxury into the standard American middle class. A Sunday morning attack in Hawaii was designed to bring a nation to its knees. Instead, the frantic race to mobilize and demobilize gave us modern medicine, federal civil rights milestones, public health institutions, and the very foundation of the modern middle class.